Well, joining us here in the studio, the former British ambassador to Pyongyang, John Everard, and in Washington, PJ Crowley, who was Hillary Clinton's spokesman at the US State Department. I want to start with you both on a very, very simple question. John Everard, you were ambassador during the period of the first nuclear test, 2006. Much more recently, you've administered the UN sanctions system against North Korea. Should we be scared?
Yes, we should. Not because I think that Kim Jong-un is looking for a nuclear war with the United States, but because as the situation gets more and more tense, so the risk that he simply miscalculates, that he crosses a red line and that he provokes retaliation from either South Korea or the United States, that risk rises. And if that happens, then it'd be very easy to enter a spiral of violence which would lead to a wider conflict.
PJ Crowley, from your perspective, we should be scared?
Well, I agree with what the ambassador just said. We've been through these cycles of provocation before. The real dilemma here is if we're on this kind of a treadmill, how do we get off? And this is where the role of China becomes very significant, although not necessarily decisive. China is as frustrated as anyone about these shenanigans. It has more influence on North Korea than anyone else. It does not have as much influence on Kim Jong-un as it might have with his father. So I think at some point, if there has not already been at least one conversation, it has to be knock this off.
Very interesting, because PJ Crowley has raised a very important issue: who in fact is in charge, in a sense, because the father's dead and the son really doesn't look the serious leader of North Korea. Is there somebody else, auntie, uncle, somebody?
The quick answer is that nobody really knows. You're right, he does look young, he is inexperienced. He has regents, Jang Song-taek, his uncle, Kim Kyung-hee, his aunt. Who actually is pulling the strings? Who makes the final decisions? I don't think we yet know. Maybe
so to PJ Crowley's second point, China. Now, you lived across the border from China in North Korea.
Yes.
They had a different posture then.
They did.
Why has it changed?
I think they are getting more and more irritated with their North Korean, quote, ally, unquote. Also, the Chinese policy is controversial, even within Beijing. A lot of Chinese have been saying for quite some time that North Korea is not a treasured geostrategic asset, is simply a nuisance and should be junked. And the Chinese have been showing increasing irritation with recent posturing by North Korea. The Chinese reaction to the North Korean move 2 days ago, stopping South Korean managers from coming into the Kaesong Industrial Zone, was particularly strongly worded. And we heard on Chinese television just yesterday that the Chinese People's Liberation Army is now moving troops around the North Korean border area, which, of course, is significant, and I don't think they've done that before.
PJ Crowley, from an American perspective, is it sensible, really, to have sent a missile system or a missile defense system to Guam? Doesn't that play North Korea's game? Do you think that's not ratcheting it up from America's side?
I think obviously they're sending a message to North Korea that if you take some action, we're prepared to respond to that. I think primarily it's a message to South Korea and to Japan that we are in fact going to prepared to, within our treaty obligations, defend you both. I think part of that is to preserve the current fundamentals, because, for example, if it becomes clear over time that North Korea is never giving up its nuclear weapons, I actually think that is the de facto North Korean position. At some point, what does South Korea do about that? Does it say, well, then we have to have our own? How does that play into Japanese calculations? That in turn says to China, now we have a different dynamic in the region. How do we respond to that? Now you've got what amounts to a nuclear arms race that is in no one's interest. So I think part of the United States message here is we're going to defend our interests and those of our allies, hoping that at some point in time, North Korea realizes it really can't have all of the things that it wants. It wants normal relations with the world, it wants international assistance, and it wants to keep its nuclear weapons. In essence, it wants to be Pakistan. And at some point in time, it has to sink in that you can have one or two of those, but not all three. Well,
that does take us to that really fascinating fact that deterrence was invented in the aftermath of the bombing of Hiroshima. That basically deterrence, we would deter other people from attacking us by having a nuclear weapon. Yes. We turned it on its head. North Korea is now using its nuclear weapon as a deterrent against America from attacking them. And who would give up their nuclear weapons? It's a pretty difficult question, isn't it?
It is, and you can see that, seen from Pyongyang's perspective, the world must look a pretty scary place. Nevertheless, I think everybody would agree that this policy is misguided. It's extremely expensive. If they hadn't spent all this money on nuclear weapons, they could have...
But only a country as sealed off from reality as they are, I mean, most people there, I mean, it's a completely kind of dragooned state, could get away with a policy like this.
Well, yes.
How have they managed to keep us all out? How has cyberspace not broken in? How is it that this country is still, in a sense, in a political sense, in the Stone Age?
It's an astonishing example of what can be achieved by way of exclusion if you are determined enough. Cyberspace is kept out simply because they will not let internet equipment in. It's as crude as that. Information is blocked at the borders. You're not allowed to bring in newspapers. It's getting much more difficult for them because, of course, now you can put a lot of information just on little thumb drives or memory sticks, and a lot of South Koreans, particularly in the outer elite of Pyongyang, have access to these. They watch news broadcasts and they just love South Korean soap operas.
Jon Everard and PJ Crowley in Washington, thank you both very warmly for joining us.